Have you ever looked at the vast, empty spaces on a map and wondered what mysteries might be hidden there, far from the eyes of the world? The remote corners of Alaska, a land of immense scale and unforgiving beauty, hold more than their share of secrets whispered on the wind or buried beneath the permafrost. One such secret began to surface not with a bang, but with a profound, unnatural silence. It started, as many things in the modern world do, with a loss of signal. Not just any signal, but the constant expected pulse from Outpost 733, a seemingly innocuous radio tower facility perched precariously on a high, windswept plateau deep in the Brooks Range. For years, Outpost 733 had been a reliable, if unremarkable, node in a vast network, monitoring atmospheric conditions, tracking migratory patterns, and providing a communication relay point in a region where satellite coverage could be unreliable. It was staffed by a small, rotating crew of 3 technicians, hardy individuals accustomed to months of isolation, the brutal cold, and the profound quiet interrupted only by the shriek of the wind or the distant howl of a wolf. Their routine was clockwork, their reports concise and regular, their presence a low-grade hum of activity in the wilderness. Then, the hum stopped. One crisp, frigid morning in late October, the automated hourly check-in from 733 failed. The monitoring station in Fairbanks flagged it. A minor blip, perhaps a temporary transmission issue or a technician forgetting to log the report during a shift change. A standard procedure was initiated. Attempts were made to contact the outpost via satellite phone, backup radio frequencies, even through an emergency beacon channel. Nothing. Just static, or worse, the unnerving dead air where a carrier signal should have been. After 24 hours of silence, the blip became a red flag. After 48, it was a full-blown alert. Outpost 733 was off the grid, completely incommunicado. The initial assumption leaned towards equipment failure. Extreme cold could do strange things to electronics, and the aging generator powering the facility had been a subject of recent maintenance discussions. A severe, localized weather event could have brought down the tower itself, though satellite imagery from a scheduled pass didn't show obvious structural collapse. The lattice work of the tower stood stark against the snow-covered ground, looking outwardly intact, though perhaps slightly obscured by recent snowfall. Yet the lack of any response from the crew was deeply troubling. These were experienced personnel, trained in emergency protocols. A generator failure should have triggered battery backups and a specific distress signal. Tower damage, while cutting transmission, wouldn't explain the silence on other communication devices. Something was fundamentally wrong. The decision was made to assemble a small, specialized team. Getting to Outpost 733 was no trivial matter. It was located in some of the most challenging terrain in Alaska, accessible only by air, and even then, dependent on favorable weather windows and the availability of a skilled bush pilot capable of landing on an unprepared surface near the facility. The nearest road was hundreds of miles away, and the ground approach through the mountains in late autumn was effectively impossible due to snow accumulation and treacherous passes. The team was carefully selected. Lead investigator was Dr. Anya Sharma, a communications engineer with a background in remote monitoring systems and a reputation for meticulousness. Joining her was Ben Carter, a seasoned Alaska state trooper with search and rescue experience and a pragmatic approach to the unexpected. The third member was Marcus Mack Riley, a former military logistics expert now working as a civilian contractor, responsible for assessing the physical state of the facility and handling any technical or power issues. Their pilot was Silas Vance, a man whose face seemed permanently etched by wind and sun, known for his calm under pressure and intimate knowledge of the Alaskan wilderness from the air. They were briefed in a sterile conference room in Fairbanks, maps spread out on the table, satellite photos pinned to a board. The images were clear but revealed little beyond the tower and the cluster of prefabricated buildings that made up the outpost. No signs of distress flares, no unusual tracks in the snow visible from orbit, just silence and stillness where there should have been activity. The official line was a communications outage requiring on-site assessment. Unofficially, there was a knot of unease in the room. Remote outposts didn't just vanish. People didn't just stop responding. The unknown stretched before them, as vast and cold as the landscape they were about to enter. Preparations were swift and efficient. They packed cold weather gear designed for extreme conditions, survival supplies, a satellite phone, hopefully more functional than the ones at 733, testing equipment for the radio systems, tools for potential repairs, and basic investigative supplies. There was also a palpable sense of urgency, a feeling that whatever had happened at the outpost, time might be a critical factor, either for potential survivors or for preserving evidence. As they loaded their gear onto the modified Twin Otter aircraft, the late afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the runway. The air was already biting, promising a frigid night. Silas checked his instruments. The engines coughed to life, and the propellers began to spin, kicking up a swirl of snow. The roar of the engines seemed to amplify the silence of the world they were leaving behind, a world of easy communication and known parameters. They were heading into the deep cold, towards a mystery as silent and vast as the landscape itself. The question hung unspoken in the air. What or who had silenced the tower, and why? What secrets did Outpost 733 hold? What do you think could cause a state-of-the-art remote outpost to go completely silent, with no emergency signals transmitted? Could it be a simple malfunction or something more complex given the human element? The flight north was long and punctuated by stretches of turbulent air as they passed over mountain ranges. Below them, the landscape was a stark canvas of white and gray, vast frozen plains giving way to jagged, snow-dusted peaks. The sun dipped below the horizon relatively early, plunging the world into a twilight that would soon deepen into full polar night, alleviated only by the moon and stars and the faint glow of the horizon to the south. Anya, strapped into her seat amidst crates of equipment, reviewed the limited data they had. Outpost 733's primary function was atmospheric data collection and ionospheric monitoring, crucial for long-range radio communication prediction and climate modeling. It also served as a relay for other remote sensors scattered across the range. The facility was designed to be largely automated, with the crew primarily overseeing operations, performing maintenance, and handling data forwarding. The last successful data transmission had been time-stamped just before the first missed check-in. The data itself was unremarkable. Standard temperature, pressure, wind speed readings, and routine ionospheric soundings. There was no indication of any impending equipment failure, sudden environmental anomaly, or distress. This absence of warning was one of the most unsettling factors. Ben, across the narrow aisle, meticulously checked his gear, cleaning and inspecting his rifle despite the cramped conditions. His movements were calm and deliberate, the motions of someone deeply familiar with preparing for unknown variables in hostile environments. Mac, meanwhile, was engrossed in schematics of the outpost's power and communication systems on a ruggedized tablet, occasionally muttering to himself about generator outputs and redundant circuits. Silas, focused intently on his controls and the faint glow of his instruments, occasionally pointed out landmarks or changes in the weather pattern below. The cold inside the cabin was pervasive despite the heater, a constant reminder of the world outside. hours bled into one another. The landscape below became an undulating grey shadow under a sky dusted with countless stars. The aurora borealis began to shimmer on the northern horizon, a ghostly green curtain adding an ethereal, almost unsettling beauty to the scene. It was a reminder of the powerful, unpredictable forces at play in this environment. Silas finally announced their proximity to the target area. "Approaching the grid coordinates, about 20 minutes out," he said, his voice steady over the intercom. "Weather's holding. Visibility isn't great, but the wind report from the nearest station is favorable for a landing on the plateau. Expect some crosswinds, though." As they drew closer, Silas circled the area, his eyes scanning the ground for a suitable landing spot and for any visual anomalies. From the air, the outpost looked exactly as it did in the satellite photos. The tower standing tall, the cluster of low-slung buildings nearby, partially covered in snowdrifts. No lights were visible, no smoke from a chimney, no vehicle tracks leading away, just the silent structures against the white expanse. Silas expertly brought the Twin Otter down in a wide, flat area of the plateau about a quarter-mile from the facility, the skis kicking up a plume of snow as they settled onto the surface. The engines wound down, and the sudden drop in noise was absolute, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling around the aircraft. The silence of the landscape rushed in, vast and heavy. Stepping out of the plane was like entering a deep freezer. The cold hit them immediately, a physical shock despite their layers of specialized clothing. It was dry, bone-chilling cold, the kind that seemed to extract the warmth from your very core. Ben was the first out, securing the area and scanning the surroundings with binoculars. Anya, Mac, and Silas quickly unloaded essential gear, communication equipment, testing kits, a survival pack, and Ben's rifle case. "Wind's picking up slightly," Silas noted, checking his weather readings. "Got maybe 2 hours before it gets uncomfortable for a potential takeoff, maybe 3 before a storm front starts pushing in from the west. We need to be efficient." "Understood, Silas," Anya replied, pulling her hood tighter around her face. "Mac and I will focus on getting inside and assessing the systems. Ben, can you do a perimeter check and accompany us?" "Already on it," Ben said, gesturing towards the outpost. "Let's move." The walk across the plateau was arduous. The snow was deeper than it looked in places, making each step an effort. The wind, though not yet gale force, was relentless, stinging exposed skin and whipping snow dust into the air, reducing visibility in gusts. As they approached the facility, the scale became more apparent. The main building was larger than it appeared from the air, a sturdy, insulated structure designed to withstand the brutal Alaskan winters. Adjacent were a smaller shed, likely for generators and fuel storage, and the imposing lattice structure of the radio tower itself, reaching up into the grey sky like a skeletal finger. There was still no sign of activity, no lights, no tracks beyond those they were making, save for some older, snow-filled impressions near the generator shed that were impossible to date accurately from a distance. The silence felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence of radio signals. It was the absence of the low mechanical hum of generators, the ventilation fans, the mundane sounds of a functioning remote facility. It was unnerving. Ben led the way, rifle held ready but not obviously displayed, his eyes sweeping constantly. They approached the main entrance, a heavy steel door set into the side of the building. There was no damage visible from the outside, no forced entry, no signs of structural stress from the wind. The door looked sealed, locked from the inside or powered down. Anya felt a prickle of unease. If it was just a power failure, the door should have been accessible. If it was locked from the inside, where were the people who had locked it? The mystery deepened with every silent step towards the imposing, quiet structure. Ben examined the door carefully, The locking mechanism appeared intact, the heavy steel unbent. He tried the handle. It was solid and unyielding. Locked, he stated simply, confirming the obvious. Doesn't look forced. Could be an electronic lock that's powered down or manually bolted from the inside. Mac stepped forward, producing a set of tools. If it's powered down, the backup manual release or key override should still work. If it's bolted from the inside, well, that's another question. He began working on the lock panel, his gloved fingers surprisingly nimble despite the cold. Anya stood back, scanning the other windows and doors. All seemed secure, shuttered, or heavily insulated against the elements. The snowdrifts were significant around the base of the building, undisturbed except for the old tracks near the generator shed and their own fresh ones. The complete lack of recent activity around the perimeter was striking. No footprints leading away into the snow, no signs of an attempt to leave on foot. Mac finished his work on the lock panel. No response from the electronic system, he reported. Trying the manual override. There was a click, then a groan as the heavy bolts retracted. The door remained shut. Feels like it's either iced shut or there's something blocking it from the inside. Ben and Mac put their shoulders to the door and pushed. It resisted, then slowly yielded with a screech of hinges, grating against something on the floor inside. As the gap widened, they could see the edge of a heavy object, a crate, or perhaps a piece of furniture, pushed against the door from within. Blocked from the inside, Ben confirmed, a new note of caution in his voice. This wasn't consistent with a simple power outage or equipment failure. It suggested deliberate action. They pushed further, forcing the obstruction aside until the door opened fully, revealing the interior of the Outpost facility. The air inside was cold, though perhaps slightly less bitter than the outside. There was a faint, stale odor, a mix of electronics, dust, and something else. Something indefinable and slightly unsettling. Their headlamps cut through the dimness. The power was indeed off. Emergency lights should have been active, but the facility was plunged into darkness, save for their lights. Mac moved immediately towards the main breaker panel, while Anya and Ben, moving cautiously, began a sweep of the common area they had entered. It was a combined living and workspace. A small kitchen area, a dining table, a few comfortable chairs, and several workstations with computer monitors. What immediately struck Anya was the state of the room. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't orderly either. There were half-eaten plates of food on the dining table, mugs with residue of what looked like coffee, a book lying open on a chair, a board game set up but unfinished. It looked like the occupants had simply stopped what they were doing, mid-activity. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken items. Yet the suddenness of it, the unfinished tasks, combined with the locked and blocked door, created a palpable sense of unease. "Power main is off," Mac called out from the utility closet. "Looks like it was manually shut down." This added another layer to the mystery. Why would the crew deliberately shut off the main power? This wasn't a standard procedure for any situation short of a catastrophic electrical fire, and there was no sign of that. Ben continued his sweep, moving down a short corridor leading to the sleeping quarters and the main operations room. "Living quarters look unoccupied," he reported, his voice slightly muffled. "Beds are unmade. Personal items are there, but no one is here." Anya moved to the computer workstations. They were all dark. She tried pressing power buttons, but nothing happened. Completely dead. Mac emerged from the closet. "Backup batteries are fully drained," he reported, sounding puzzled. "That shouldn't be possible." They're supposed to last for days, automatically recharged by the generator when it's running, or by solar panels if the main fails in daylight. Unless the system was somehow bypassed, or the batteries themselves were disconnected or damaged, Anya finished for him. Or drained incredibly rapidly by something, Mac added, frowning. The facility's silence wasn't just due to a lack of power. It was as if the power systems had been deliberately disabled or catastrophically failed in a way that bypassed all redundancies. Ben reappeared from the corridor. Operations room next. Seems secure. He pushed open the door to the largest room in the facility, the heart of Outpost 733. This room was dominated by consoles, servers, and monitoring screens, all dark and silent. The air in here felt even colder, thick with the presence of dormant technology. Unlike the common area, this room felt sterile, functional, even in its current state of disuse. Anya moved towards the main server racks. These were the core of the Outpost's function, storing the collected data and controlling the transmission equipment. Her goal was to see if any data logs survived the power failure, if any record existed of the events leading up to the silence. As Mac began working on getting auxiliary power to one of the workstations or servers, Anya noticed something on the main console, a small physical object that didn't seem to belong. It was a single, small key lying on the keyboard of the primary operator console. It looked like a locker key, or perhaps a key to a specific piece of equipment. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but in the context of the abandoned, darkened outpost, it felt significant, like a breadcrumb in a trail gone cold. The deliberate blocking of the door, the manually shut-off power, the drained backups, the sudden cessation of activity, and now this solitary key. None of it fit a simple narrative of equipment failure or weather damage. Something had happened here. Something that had caused 3 experienced individuals to abandon their posts and their routine lives without a trace, leaving behind only questions and an unsettling silence. Mac worked methodically, connecting a portable power unit to a critical server rack. The goal was to bypass the failed internal power systems and extract any remaining data logs before the cold potentially damaged the hardware further. Anya assisted, navigating the maze of cables by headlamp, while Ben maintained vigilance, his presence a quiet, reassuring anchor in the unsettling silence of the operations room. As Mac powered up the server, a faint hum filled the air, a stark contrast to the preceding stillness. Indicator lights flickered to life, a soft glow in the darkness. Anya leaned over the console Mac was working on, her breath misting in the cold air. "Can you access the system logs?" she asked, her voice low. "That's the priority. We need timestamps, error reports, any unusual activity." Mac's fingers flew across the keyboard, entering commands. A stream of text began to scroll across the screen. "Okay, accessing system logs. Filtering for events in the last 72 hours. The logs were dense, a technical record of the outpost's operations. Routine system checks, data acquisitions, outgoing transmissions, all logged with precise timestamps. They scrolled back, looking for the point where the routine broke. They found it, just as expected, correlating with the time the automated check-in failed. The last log entry was a standard system status report, time-stamped exactly when the monitoring station had noted the silence. What came after that point was the mystery, but the log itself offered no clue. Nothing in the system logs about a shutdown, Mac reported, frustration evident in his voice. No error messages, no power failure alerts, nothing indicating a problem. It just stops logging at that exact moment. This was impossible under normal circumstances. Even a sudden catastrophic failure should generate some kind of logged event, an error code, a system crash report. For the logs to simply cease implied the system was either instantly destroyed or intentionally halted in a way that prevented logging. Mac continued digging, searching for network activity logs, security access logs, anything that might shed light on the final moments of the Outpost's operation. The security logs showed no unusual external access attempts. The internal network activity showed the expected data flow between the consoles and the servers, right up until the silence. There were no signs of intrusion, no malicious software activity detected by the system's basic security protocols. While Mac delved into the digital remnants, Anya turned her attention to the rest of the operations room. Desks were tidy, equipment seemed properly stowed. On one of the consoles, near where she'd found the key, was a personal tablet, its screen dark. She picked it up, noting it was a standard-issue device used by the crew for notes, personal communication, when available, and perhaps accessing non-critical data. Its battery was dead. She placed it carefully in an evidence bag. Ben, meanwhile, had been systematically searching the entire facility. The sleeping quarters, the small recreation room, the utility areas, even the storage shed outside. He returned to the operations room, his face grim. No sign of the crew, he confirmed. Their personal effects are all here. Clothes in lockers, toiletries in the washroom, even family photos on bedside tables. Food supplies are ample. There's nothing to suggest they plan to leave or left in a hurry with supplies. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. And no signs of any struggle, forced removal, or anything untoward within the buildings themselves. The absence was more profound than finding evidence of a problem. It was as if the three people had simply evaporated. Mac let out a sigh. Okay. I've extracted the primary logs and some configuration files. There's nothing in the data itself that screams disaster or intrusion. It just looks like the plug was pulled, but in a way that bypassed all the failsafes. Anya considered this. So, manual shutdown bypassing failsafes. That requires intimate knowledge of the system. It would have to be one of the crew. Mac nodded. Or someone with their level of expertise. But why? And why the blocked door? Why abandon the post, leaving everything behind? The mystery deepened. If the crew had deliberately shut everything down, why? Were they leaving? If so, how and why with no supplies? And why barricade themselves in before leaving? Or were they barricading something out? Ben interrupted their technical discussion. I checked the generator shed again. Fuel levels are good. The generator itself seems physically intact, no obvious damage. But the power cables leading from it to the main building, they look fine too. He paused. However, there are very faint, almost completely snow-filled tracks leading from the generator shed towards the rear of the main building where the primary power conduit enters. They're old, hard to make out, but they're there. Look like single sets of footprints, maybe made in softer snow that's since compacted or drifted over. This was the first potential physical anomaly they had found outside the building itself. It suggested someone had been moving between the generator shed and the main building recently, perhaps just before the snow became too deep to leave clear tracks, and the power had been manually shut off at the main breaker, inside. Did this imply tampering at the generator first? Or was it a crew member shutting things down after dealing with an issue at the shed? Anya looked towards the back wall of the operations room, where the main data cables from the tower entered the building. Mac, can you check the status of the tower connection? See if there's any integrity check data or if the tower itself was transmitting anything that didn't make it into the server. Mac accessed a different part of the system interface. Checking tower link status. System reports link is down. No data coming in from the tower antennae. Could be a break in the cable, or the tower equipment itself is powered off or damaged. Anya remembered the satellite photo. The tower looked intact. A physical cable break was possible, but less likely than a power issue at the tower base or the equipment cabinet halfway up. "Is there any way to check the power supply to the tower?" she asked. Mac consulted the schematics. "Yeah, it's fed directly from the main facility power, but there's a local disconnect at the base and a power unit higher up. We'd need to go outside to check the base, and someone would need to climb the tower to check the upper unit and the antennae. Not advisable in this weather without proper climbing gear and safety personnel." A climb was out of the question for this initial assessment. They had to rely on what they could find inside and on the ground. The key she had found still lay in the evidence bag. It was small, unremarkable, but persistently drew her attention. What did it unlock? Mac was still working on the system, trying to retrieve any non-standard files or logs that might have been stored elsewhere. "Wait a minute," he said, leaning closer to the screen. "There are some encrypted files here. Not standard system files. They're stored separately in a directory labeled Project Nightingale." Project Nightingale. It wasn't part of the official operational brief for Outpost 733. This facility was ostensibly for atmospheric and ionospheric research. Encrypted files labeled with a project name suggested a secondary, perhaps classified, purpose for the outpost. And whatever it was significant enough to warrant dedicated, encrypted storage. Was this the key to the mystery? Had whatever happened here been related to Project Nightingale? Accessing the encrypted files labeled Project Nightingale proved to be a significant challenge. Mac worked for hours, running decryption algorithms, trying different key combinations suggested by common government or research project protocols, all while the temperature inside the facility remained stubbornly low, clinging just above freezing, despite their auxiliary power unit running. Anya reviewed other aspects of the facility. In the sleeping quarters, she found personal items that offered glimpses into the lives of the 3 missing crew members. Technician Sarah Chen, known for her meticulous logs and love of bird watching, explaining the binoculars on her desk. Engineer David Miller, a quiet man reportedly skilled in complex repairs, whose bunk had stacks of technical manuals and a well-worn chess set. And team lead Captain Elias Thorne, a former military officer known for his strict adherence to protocol, whose room was Spartan but contained a single, framed photograph of a woman and child. There was nothing in their personal effects that suggested they were planning to leave or were in any distress before the incident. No packed bags, no farewell notes, no indications of conflict among them. It reinforced the unsettling feeling that whatever happened, it happened suddenly and unexpectedly. Ben returned from another sweep, having investigated the external storage shed more thoroughly. "Found a snowmobile inside," he reported. "Fuel tank is nearly full. Keys are on a hook next to it. Doesn't look like it's been used recently. There's a thin layer of dust on it and it's covered in snow blown in from under the door. No tracks leading away from the facility made by a snowmobile." This further contradicted the idea of the crew abandoning the outpost via vehicle. If they had left, the snowmobile was their most likely means of transportation in this terrain, and it was untouched. The key Anya found lay on the operations console, still intriguing. It was small, metallic, with a simple shape that suggested it opened a basic lock, perhaps on a cabinet or a container. She systematically checked every locked drawer, cabinet, and box she could find in the main building. Most were standard-issue locks that her universal key set could handle, or were simply latched. The small key didn't fit any of them. It must belong to something specific, perhaps related to Project Nightingale, or maybe something entirely unrelated but left in a conspicuous place. Anything on those files, Mac? She asked, trying to keep the fatigue out of her voice. The cold, the lack of sleep, and the sheer baffling nature of the situation were wearing on them. Mac shook his head, rubbing his eyes. It's tough. This encryption isn't standard issue. It looks custom. Without the key or a serious amount of computing power we don't have here, breaking it is going to take a very long time. He paused, looking thoughtful. However, I did find something else. Hidden in the system files, masked to look like routine diagnostic data. A small audio file, encrypted but with a much weaker cipher. I can try and run a brute force on it here. It might only take a few minutes. An audio file? This was new. Official logs were text or data streams. An audio recording felt personal, potentially a crew member's voice log or something else entirely. Do it, Anya said immediately. The operations room fell silent again, save for the hum of the power unit and the soft clicks of Mac's keyboard as the decryption program ran. Ben stood by the door, scanning the dark windows periodically. A silent sentinel. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the shutters and sighing around the corners of the building. The isolation felt more profound now, knowing they were the only people for hundreds of miles, in a place where 3 others had simply vanished. A small notification popped up on Mac's screen. Got it, he announced. He quickly opened a media player program, adjusted the volume and clicked play. The audio was poor quality, overlaid with static and the sound of wind. But a voice was discernible, strained, urgent, male. It sounded like Captain Thorne. System shutdown, initiated. Manually. Fail-safes, bypassed. They're outside. Can't get in. Whatever it is. The silence. Key is on the console. Data. Project Nightingale. Couldn't stop it. Spreading. God help us. The cold. The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by static. A heavy silence fell over the operations room, more potent than the earlier mechanical stillness. The words hung in the air. They're outside. Whatever it is. The silence. Spreading. The cold. Outside, Ben repeated, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. Something was outside, trying to get in, and Thorne shut down the power and barricaded the door. Mac looked pale, and he mentioned the silence, and spreading, and the cold. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the low temperature of the room. The silence isn't just a loss of signal, she murmured. He mentioned the silence specifically, like it was a phenomenon, and spreading. Mac looked back at the console. He said the key is on the console, the key you found. Anya picked up the small key again. It wasn't just a random item. Thorne had deliberately left it there as a clue. A clue to what? What did it unlock that contained data about Project Nightingale, something he couldn't stop and was spreading? And what was outside? An animal? Unlikely to cause this level of panic and lead to a full system shutdown. Humans? Who would be out here? Another government agency? Saboteurs? Thorne's voice had sounded genuinely terrified. Not like someone dealing with standard protocol violations. The mention of the cold was also strange. They were in Alaska. Cold was a constant factor. Was it referring to the temperature or something else? The audio clip, though brief and garbled, cracked the mystery wide open while simultaneously deepening it. They're outside. Whatever it is. The silence. Spreading. The cold. Thorne's desperate words painted a picture far more complex and terrifying than a simple technical failure or even a personnel issue. Something was outside the facility, actively trying to get in. Something that prompted the base commander to perform a complete, non-standard system shutdown, bypassing all fail-safes and barricade the door. The mention of the silence and spreading was particularly unsettling. It wasn't just about communication silence. It sounded like a tangible phenomenon, perhaps even the cause of the communication failure, somehow linked to the cold. Max stared at the console, the audio file still open. "Project Nightingale," he murmured. "That's what the encrypted files are about." And Thorne said the key is on the console related to the data. The key must unlock something containing information about Project Nightingale and perhaps what's happening. Anya held up the small key. It was too small for any of the standard server racks or storage cabinets she'd already checked. She looked around the operations room again, her eyes scanning for anything she might have missed, any non-standard piece of equipment or furniture. Her gaze fell on a large, reinforced cabinet against one wall, separate from the main server racks. It was labeled Restricted Access, Level 4 Clearance Required. This wasn't a standard cabinet for this type of facility. It looked more robust, like a secure storage unit. She approached it. It had a heavy, padlocked clasp. Her standard key set didn't include a key for this type of padlock. She examined the padlock more closely. It was a high-security model, but it had a keyhole. Could the small key fit this lock? She inserted the small key into the padlock. It fit perfectly. With a click, the heavy steel shackle sprung open. Taking a deep breath, Anya opened the cabinet. Inside, on a shelf, was a single, ruggedized portable hard drive. It was labeled with a serial number and a small sticker that read Project Nightingale, Data Repository. Beside it sat a small metal box, also locked, but with a combination dial, not a keyhole. Anya picked up the hard drive. It felt cold and heavy in her hand. This was clearly the data Thorne was referring to. Mac immediately took the hard drive, connecting it to his laptop via a shielded cable. "This is going to take a minute to mount and scan," he said, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "It's probably encrypted too, but accessing the file system itself might give us clues." While Mac worked on the hard drive, Ben went back to the audio file, replaying the final seconds repeatedly, trying to decipher any additional details from Thorne's distressed voice or the background noise. Anya looked at the metal box with the combination dial. What was in there? More data? Equipment? Thorne hadn't mentioned it in the audio log. Ben stood up abruptly. "Listen," he said, beckoning them over to the operations room door. "The wind. It's changing. Getting stronger." They paused, listening. The constant whistle of the wind outside had indeed taken on a more aggressive tone, rising in pitch and intensity. Silas's warning about the approaching storm front came back to Anya. They were running out of time. "Mac, how long for the hard drive?" she pressed. "Can you at least see the file structure, any file names?" "Almost there," he replied, eyes glued to the screen. "Okay. Accessing the drive. It is encrypted, but I can see the file names. They're logs. Lots of them. Timestamped logs, going back several months. And some directories labeled readings, analysis, observations." The file names themselves were technical, seemingly related to data collection, but not the kind of atmospheric data they were expecting for Outpost 733's official function. There were terms like energy signatures, resonance frequency, environmental anomaly tracking, This was clearly not standard weather monitoring. Can you get any data off it at all without full decryption? Anya asked. Maybe the most recent logs? Mac tried. Negative. Everything's encrypted. The file names are all I can get for now. We'd need the key, or serious processing power, to access the contents. Anya's gaze fell back on the small key she'd used to open the cabinet. Thorne had said key is on the console. Data. Project Nightingale. He hadn't said the key decrypts the data, but that it was with the data, or led to it. Could the key itself be the key? Or a part of it? It seemed too simple. What if the key unlocked something else entirely? Something that contained the decryption key or explained the project? The metal box. It was locked with a combination, not this key. Thorne hadn't mentioned the box. Mac finished copying the directory structure and file names from the hard drive onto his laptop for later analysis. That's all I can do with this here, he stated, carefully disconnecting the hard drive and placing it back in the cabinet. We need to get this back to a proper lab. The wind outside was now howling, shaking the building perceptibly. Snow was battering against the windows. Silas is going to want to leave soon, Ben warned. Conditions are deteriorating fast. Anya looked from the hard drive to the metal box. The box was still a mystery. Thorne hadn't mentioned it. Was it important? Or just another piece of equipment? But it was locked in the same restricted cabinet as the Project Nightingale data. It felt significant. She knew they couldn't stay long, but she was hesitant to leave anything behind. The storm outside intensified rapidly. The wind shrieked around the outpost, a relentless, mournful sound that seemed to press against the walls. Snow hammered the windows, visibility outside dropping to near zero. Silas's voice crackled over the satellite phone, barely audible through the storm's interference, urging them to conclude their investigation and prepare for departure. He couldn't stay on the ground for long in these conditions. The pressure to leave mounted. Anya looked at the hard drive containing the encrypted Project Nightingale data, then at the locked metal box. Mac had managed to retrieve the file structure confirming the data's nature related to energy signatures and environmental anomalies, but the contents remained inaccessible. The audio clip from Thorne offered a terrifying glimpse into their final moments. The presence outside, the deliberate shutdown, the mention of the silence, spreading, and the cold. The small key had led them to the cabinet, but the box remained a puzzle. We have to go, Ben urged, his eyes on the windows. Visibility is dropping fast. If we get stuck here, we're on our own. Anya knew he was right. Staying any longer was risking being trapped by the storm, potentially for days or weeks, with limited supplies and no communication until the weather broke. They had the hard drive, the audio clip, and the physical evidence from the facility. The abandoned state, the barricaded door, the manually shut down power. It was more than they'd hoped to find initially, enough to launch a serious investigation back in Fairbanks. But the mystery of what was outside, what caused the panic, and what the silence and spreading meant, remained unanswered. And the metal box felt like a crucial piece of the puzzle they were leaving behind. The box, she said, pointing to it. Thorne didn't mention it, but it was in the same cabinet. What if it contained something vital? Mac checked the box again. Combination lock. Standard design, but could be anything. We don't have time to try breaking it open here without damaging potential contents, assuming we even could. Anya made a quick decision. We take it with us, carefully. Ben, can you secure it? Ben nodded, retrieved a padded equipment case and carefully placed the metal box inside, securing it with straps. "All right," he said, zipping the case. "We have the hard drive, the audio file, the key, and the box. That's everything we can safely take." They did a final, quick sweep, ensuring they hadn't missed anything obvious in their haste. The operations room felt colder now, the silence of the dormant equipment replaced by the roar of the storm outside. Leaving the outpost felt strange, like abandoning a crime scene before the full story had been told. As they stepped back out into the maelstrom, the wind hit them with brutal force, stinging their faces with ice particles. Visibility was reduced to mere feet in the whiteout conditions. Following Ben's lead, they navigated back towards where Silas had landed the plane, using headlamps and relying on Ben's sense of direction and the faint, almost buried tracks they had made earlier. The quarter-mile felt like a mile in the driving snow and wind. The Twin Otter was a dark shape partially obscured by snowdrifts, its engines whining softly against the storm. Silas was waiting by the open cargo door, his face anxious. "Hurry!" he yelled over the wind. "We need to get out of here. Now!" They scrambled aboard, securing their gear as Silas went through the pre-flight checks with practiced speed. The cabin was relatively warmer, a small refuge from the fury outside, but the noise of the storm pressing against the aircraft was unnerving. As Silas taxied the plane, the skis crunching on the snow, Anya looked back towards the dark shape of the outpost buildings, barely visible through the swirling snow. The radio tower stood like a silent sentinel, its purpose obscured by the weather and the mystery. What had happened there? What was Project Nightingale? What was the force outside? And was it still there? The questions swirled in her mind like the snow outside. Silas got clearance from Fairbanks. The nearest air traffic control was advising against all non-essential flight, but Silas argued their departure was essential. With a surge of power, the Twin Otter accelerated down the makeshift runway, the engines straining against the wind. They lifted off, the ground dropping away below, swallowed almost immediately by the white chaos of the storm. The flight back was rough. The aircraft was tossed around by the turbulent air currents, making it difficult to relax or even think clearly. Anya clutched the padded case containing the metal box and the hard drive, feeling the weight of the unknown in her hands. The hard drive held the potential explanation, locked away by encryption. The box held... what? Another key? Instructions? A device? The metal box represented a tangible piece of the puzzle that might hold the key to understanding Thorne's last words and the fate of the crew. Back in Fairbanks, the storm had lessened somewhat, though the cold was still intense. They were met by a small team from the agency that oversaw the outpost, eager for their report. The hard drive and the metal box were immediately taken to a secure facility for analysis. The audio clip was processed to try and reduce the static and clarify Thorne's words further. The initial debriefing was intense. Anya, Ben, and Mac recounted their findings. The state of the facility, the abandoned personal effects, the barricaded door, the manually shut-off power, the drained backups, the untouched snowmobile, the encrypted data, the audio clip, and the locked box. The mention of Project Nightingale drew sharp, guarded reactions from the agency personnel. It was clearly a sensitive, perhaps classified operation they hadn't been fully briefed on. The full implications of Thorne's message, something outside, the silence spreading, the cold, were met with skepticism by some, attributed to stress, isolation-induced paranoia, or even hypothermia-induced confusion. But Anya and the team knew what they had seen and heard. The methodical shutdown and barricading didn't fit a panicked, irrational act. It seemed deliberate, a last-ditch attempt to contain or escape something. The silence wasn't just a lack of signal. Thorne had spoken of it as an entity or a phenomenon. The days following their return were a blur of debriefings, reports, and waiting. The hard drive from Outpost 733 was the top priority. Specialists worked around the clock, using powerful computers and advanced decryption techniques. Meanwhile, the metal box was examined. It was heavy, made of reinforced steel, designed to protect its contents from environmental extremes and potential physical impact. The combination lock was complex. Without the combination, or a method to bypass it without damage, it was effectively sealed. The small key Anya had found was tested on numerous locks, both standard and non-standard, but it didn't fit anything else they could identify, nor did it seem to be a digital key or password fragment. It remained a lingering question mark. What was its purpose? The enhanced audio analysis of Thorne's recording yielded slightly clearer results but confirmed the original terrifying message. The static and wind were still present, but the words, "They're outside," whatever it is, the silence, spreading, the cold, were undeniable. The phrase "couldn't stop it" was also more distinct, adding to the sense of an overwhelming force or phenomenon. Speculation within the team and the fringes of the investigation focused on possibilities ranging from an aggressive wildlife encounter, though unlikely to cause a system shutdown, to human intruders, sabotage, extraction, to something entirely unknown, related to the Outpost's secret mission, Project Nightingale. Then, after several days, a breakthrough came from the decryption team working on the hard drive. They hadn't fully decrypted the bulk of the logs yet, but they had managed to access some of the file headers and metadata, along with a partially corrupted index file. This confirmed that the data wasn't related to atmospheric science as commonly understood. Instead, the logs detailed monitoring of localized, extremely low-frequency energy signatures originating from deep within the Earth beneath the plateau. The project name, Nightingale, might refer to these low frequencies, often compared to birdsong. The analysis logs hinted at correlations between these energy emissions, unusual ionospheric disturbances directly above the outpost, and localized environmental effects, particularly temperature fluctuations and what seemed to be a measure of ambient silence or lack of expected background radiation / energy. The logs spoke of these correlations intensifying in the weeks leading up to the outpost going dark. One partially recovered file title mentioned correlation with hypothermia-like symptoms. Another referenced localized disruptions, biological and electronic. This information, even encrypted, was chilling. It suggested Outpost 733 wasn't just listening to the Earth. It was monitoring something potentially hazardous, something that could affect both living organisms and electronic systems, and was linked to the extreme cold and a phenomenon they termed the silence. The theory began to form. Project Nightingale was monitoring a geophysical or environmental anomaly beneath the plateau. This anomaly manifested as unusual low-frequency emissions, potentially linked to ionospheric disturbances and the strange localized silence. Thorne's message implied this phenomenon had somehow breached the safety parameters, becoming an external threat. They're outside, possibly referring to the manifestations of the anomaly rather than specific entities, that was actively affecting the outpost, couldn't stop it. Spreading, causing unusual effects possibly related to cold or hypothermia, the cold, and was somehow directly related to the communication failure and loss of activity, the silence. This also explained the barricaded door and the system shutdown, desperate measures to prevent the phenomenon from entering or spreading from within. and to prevent the data from being transmitted or corrupted. But what was the phenomenon itself? A unique geological vent releasing some kind of energy? A previously unknown atmospheric interaction? Something else entirely? The metal box remained a tantalizing unknown. Was it related to Project Nightingale or the anomaly? Did it contain a device used in the project, or something the crew tried to protect from it? A decision was made to attempt to open the box non-destructively, using precision tools to bypass the combination lock. This would take more time and specialized equipment. In the meantime, the recovered hard drive data, incomplete as it was enough to trigger higher-level alerts within various government agencies. Outpost 753 was no longer just a missing persons case or a technical failure. It was now tied to a potentially dangerous, classified environmental or geophysical event. The remote plateau was declared a restricted zone, ostensibly for environmental study following a potential hazardous material leak, a cover story designed to keep the true nature of the investigation secret. Preparations began for a potential return trip to the site, but this time with a larger team, including geologists, physicists, and hazardous material specialists, equipped with different kinds of monitoring equipment and, crucially, better security and safety protocols. The empty outpost, silent and snowbound under the vast Alaskan sky, held its secrets tight, but the data retrieved, the audio clip, and the unopened box hinted at a truth more complex and disturbing than anyone had initially imagined. A truth somehow intertwined with the deepest cold and an unnerving, pervasive silence. Opening the metal box proved difficult, even with specialized tools. The combination lock was intricate and designed to withstand tampering. It took another 2 days of painstaking work in a secure lab before technicians managed to bypass the mechanism without damaging the box's contents. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted foam padding, were 2 items. The first was a thick, bound logbook, its cover plain gray, the pages within filled with dense, handwritten notes and diagrams. The second was a single, unusual device, cylindrical, about 6 inches long and 2 inches in diameter, made of a dark, non-reflective metal. It had a small, complex interface on one end, a port that looked like a data connection, and a series of indicator lights. This was clearly not standard issue equipment for a radio outpost. The logbook appeared to be Captain Thorne's personal project journal, separate from the official outpost logs. His neat handwriting detailed the progress and observations of Project Nightingale. It confirmed their hypothesis. The outpost was indeed monitoring low-frequency energy emissions from a specific geological feature beneath the plateau. Thorne's entries tracked the fluctuations in these emissions and their observed correlations. Early entries were scientific and observational, but as time went on, the tone shifted. Thorne began to note peculiar environmental effects, localized drops in temperature beyond expected norms, strange atmospheric phenomena directly above the source area, and increasingly, effects on equipment. Electronics would behave erratically. Data corruption, temporary failures, strange readings that couldn't be calibrated. Then, the entries started detailing biological effects, first observed in local wildlife. Animals found near the source area showed signs of disorientation, lethargy, and in some cases, severe hypothermia-like symptoms despite ambient temperatures that should have been survivable for Arctic fauna. Eventually, Thorne began to log effects on the crew themselves. Headaches, nausea, difficulty concentrating, extreme fatigue, and a pervasive feeling of dread or unease when near certain areas of the facility or during periods of peak energy emission. He noted that these symptoms seemed correlated with the intensity of the low-frequency signals and the presence of the localized silence, which he described not just as a lack of sound, but an unnerving absence of expected energy or radiation background noise, almost a hole in the normal environmental energetic presence. Thorne's entries described the crew becoming increasingly stressed, isolated, and affected by these phenomena. He speculated in his log that the anomaly was somehow influencing their environment and possibly their minds, leading to irrational behavior or impaired judgment. The final entries were frantic. He wrote about the emissions reaching unprecedented levels, coinciding with an expansion of the silence effect. He documented the equipment failures accelerating, including their primary communication systems. He noted the increasing severity of their own symptoms. His very last entry, dated the day the outpost went silent, described a moment of intense activity from the source, coupled with a profound drop in temperature directly outside the facility and a complete loss of function in their remaining electronic devices, including the backup power systems. He wrote about seeing shapes or distortions in the air outside during the peak of the event, attributing them perhaps to localized atmospheric refractions caused by the energy, or less scientifically, to the psychological effects the anomaly was having on him. He described making the decision to shut down the main power manually, believing that the energy surge was being amplified or somehow interacting dangerously with the facility's systems, and hoping to contain the anomaly, or at least protect the data, by isolating the outpost. He wrote about the crew being incapacitated, or perhaps having already succumbed to the cold symptoms, his log ending with the line, "The silence is complete. The cold is absolute. There is nothing left but the data. May it be enough?" The device found in the box was harder to identify. There were diagrams and notes about it in Thorne's journal. He referred to it as a resonance nullifier prototype, or RN1. According to his notes, it was an experimental device developed as part of Project Nightingale, designed to emit a counter-frequency intended to disrupt or neutralize the effects of the low-frequency anomaly they were monitoring. Thorne's logs indicated he had tested it several times, with limited, inconsistent results. The final entries suggested he believed the anomaly was escalating beyond the prototype's capabilities, or perhaps had found a way to bypass its effect. It was a piece of advanced, potentially highly experimental technology directly linked to the phenomenon they were studying. This explained why he secured it. It was probably the most sensitive piece of equipment related to the project, or perhaps he hoped it could still be analyzed back in a lab. The information from Thorne's logbook, combined with the hard drive data and the audio clip, painted a clearer, albeit still terrifying, picture. Project Nightingale was a secret effort to study a dangerous geophysical anomaly in Alaska. This anomaly emitted energy that caused environmental disturbances, electronic failures, and severe physiological and psychological effects, amplified by the extreme cold and linked to a phenomenon they called the silence. The crew was overwhelmed by an escalation of this anomaly, leading to their disappearance, the facility shut down, and the communication blackout. They hadn't simply vanished. They had been consumed or incapacitated by the very phenomenon they were monitoring. The silence of the tower wasn't just a technical problem. It was a manifestation of the anomaly itself. The implications of Thorne's logbook and the device were profound and disturbing. Project Nightingale wasn't just about monitoring. It was about a potentially hostile or at least incredibly dangerous environmental anomaly. The anomaly wasn't static. It was escalating, spreading, and seemed to have direct, detrimental effects on life, hypothermia-like symptoms, and technology, localized disruptions. The concept of the silence as a phenomenon tied to extreme cold and this energy emission was particularly unsettling. Was it an energy drain? A localized disruption of fundamental forces? The resonance nullifier prototype suggested attempts were being made to counteract it, likely unsuccessfully in the end. The information was immediately classified at the highest level. Outpost 733 and the surrounding plateau were now considered not just a restricted area, but a containment zone. The initial cover story of a hazardous material leak was maintained for public consumption. A new expedition was swiftly organized, comprised of highly specialized personnel. A larger team of physicists, geophysicists, electronics experts, and medical professionals, accompanied by a heavily armed security detail and equipped with advanced monitoring equipment, environmental suits, and countermeasures based on the little information they had about the anomaly and the RN1 prototype. Anya was included in this team. Her expertise in the facility's systems and her prior experience at the site deemed invaluable. Ben joined the security detail, his knowledge of the terrain and survival skills essential. Mac remained behind to continue work on decrypting the hard drive and analyzing the RN1 device, which was far too sensitive to bring back to the site. The return journey was undertaken with extreme caution. The weather had cleared significantly, leaving the landscape pristine but brutally cold. Approaching the plateau, the new team's sensitive equipment began registering unusual readings long before they reached the outpost. Localized temperature fluctuations, strange atmospheric energy levels, and the distinct, unnerving signature of the silence phenomenon registered on their sensors. A quantifiable absence where there should have been detectable background energy. Landing was smooth, but stepping onto the plateau felt different this time. Despite the clear weather, the air felt heavy, inert. The silence wasn't just the absence of man-made noise. It was a deeper, more profound stillness, as if the very atoms were vibrating less. The outpost buildings stood exactly as they had left them, snowdrifts undisturbed since the storm, but the feeling surrounding them was different. A palpable sense of wrongness, a pervasive cold that seemed to seep into their bones regardless of their gear, and that unnerving lack of ambient energetic hum. The security team established a perimeter while the scientists began setting up their monitoring equipment around the facility and the suspected source area identified in Thorne's logs, a rocky outcrop about 100 yards from the main building. Their instruments confirmed the presence of the anomaly, fluctuating low-frequency emissions emanating from deep underground, coinciding with localized temperature drops and the silence phenomenon, which their equipment measured as a significant deviation from expected zero-point energy levels. Inside the facility, everything was exactly as they had left it. The air was still frigid, the unfinished board game, the half-eaten food, untouched, frozen in time. A medical team conducted a forensic sweep, looking for any biological traces of the missing crew. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, no bodily fluids indicative of violence. It was as if the crew had simply ceased to exist. However, the medical team's instruments registered anomalous readings when scanning the areas where the crew's personal items were found, or where Thorne's log indicated symptoms were most severe. Strange energy signatures that seemed to linger, and localized microclimates of extreme cold that didn't dissipate. Further investigation of Thorne's logbook revealed that the small key Anya had found wasn't meant to unlock anything. It was a physical override for a specific emergency transmission protocol, designed to send a burst of data about Project Nightingale on a secure frequency in a full system failure scenario. Thorne had left it on the console intending to use it as a last resort, but the anomaly had escalated too quickly, disabling even this failsafe. The key itself was a red herring, its significance purely symbolic of his final, thwarted attempt to communicate. The team began a systematic search of the area around the outpost, focusing on the suspected source location. They used ground-penetrating radar and seismic sensors. The data revealed a complex geological structure beneath the plateau, including a large, previously unknown cavern system at considerable depth, and evidence of unusual energy propagation pathways leading upwards towards the surface. There was no evidence of a physical opening or vent at the surface level near the rocky outcrop, suggesting the energy was bleeding through the rock itself, perhaps amplified by the unique mineral composition of the area or its proximity to a fault line. As they worked, the scientists began experiencing the same symptoms Thorne had described: headaches, disorientation, a growing sense of dread. Their equipment also started malfunctioning, particularly sensitive electronic devices placed closest to the anomaly's source. Data streams became corrupted, readings jumped erratically, and backup batteries drained inexplicably fast. The silence wasn't just a reading. It felt like a presence, a draining force that inhibited not just electronics, but thought itself, amplifying the biting cold into something that felt existential. The medical team confirmed that exposure to the peak anomaly area caused rapid, non-standard drops in core body temperature, faster than could be explained by ambient cold alone, and accompanied by neurological confusion. It was as if the anomaly was actively extracting energy, including thermal and perhaps even biological energy, from its surroundings. This was the terrifying truth hinted at in Thorne's log. The anomaly wasn't just emitting energy, it was consuming it, creating localized zones of profound cold and silence that were lethal to life and detrimental to technology. The crew hadn't vanished. They had likely succumbed to this effect, their bodies flash-frozen, or somehow disintegrated at a molecular level by the extreme, unnatural energy drain, leaving no trace behind. The barricaded door wasn't just to keep something out. It might have been a desperate, futile attempt to shield themselves from the spreading effect, or perhaps a final act of containment to prevent the anomaly from following them if they had attempted escape. Project Nightingale was born from monitoring a geophysical curiosity, but it had inadvertently discovered something far more dangerous: a localized, spreading thermodynamic or energetic anomaly capable of causing rapid, silent, and complete entropic collapse in biological and electronic systems. The Outpost 733 incident was not a mystery of what happened, but a terrifying confirmation of what was happening. The stark reality of the anomaly solidified. Outpost 733 was built over a cold spot of fundamental energy, a siphon drawing heat and potentially other forms of energy from its surroundings, creating zones of extreme cold and a measurable silence of background energy. This effect wasn't static. It fluctuated and, critically, seemed to be expanding in intensity and range, as suggested by Thorne's spreading comment. The crew's disappearance was a direct, horrifying consequence of being caught within an escalation of this localized entropic field. The forensic medical analysis, initially finding nothing, later reported detecting faint, anomalous crystalline structures in dust samples taken from the crew's quarters and the operations room, structures not consistent with ice or any known minerals, hinting at a process of rapid, unnatural material transformation at a molecular level. This supported the theory of a localized energy drain causing instantaneous, complete molecular breakdown, leaving no macroscopic traces. The resonance nullifier prototype, RN1 from the box, was extensively tested in the lab. It was a complex device designed to generate a counter-frequency field. Initial results were inconclusive. It produced a measurable energy output but didn't seem to significantly affect standard thermal or electromagnetic fields in controlled conditions. Mack and the team hypothesized that its function might be specific to the unique energy signature of the anomaly, or that the prototype was simply not powerful enough. The hard drive decryption continued, slowly yielding more of Thorne's scientific logs, detailing the anomaly's signature and behavior. These logs confirmed the link between low-frequency emissions, ionospheric disturbance, localized cold, and the silence phenomenon. Thorne had been meticulously documenting the anomaly's growth, expressing increasing concern about its potential to breach the confines of the plateau. The new team on the plateau, armed with this understanding, focused on containment and further study from a distance. They established a perimeter far from the peak anomaly zone, deploying a network of robust, radiation-hardened sensors designed to withstand the silence effect and the extreme cold. These sensors were linked wirelessly to a command center established miles away, outside the anomaly's current known range. They monitored the energy emissions, temperature gradients, and the boundary of the silence zone. The data confirmed that the anomaly was still active, fluctuating in intensity. The area immediately around Outpost 733 showed the most extreme readings, a persistent core of unnerving cold and energetic silence. The outpost itself stood within this zone, a silent monument to the power of the unknown. A decision was made not to enter the core anomaly zone again, at least not without significant technological advancements or a clearer understanding of how to counteract the effect. The risk to human life and expensive equipment was deemed too high. The outpost and the area around it became a permanent exclusion zone, monitored remotely. Project Nightingale, once a secret research initiative, became a highly classified containment protocol. The official story remained vague. An environmental hazard, a leak of some kind, necessitating long-term monitoring. The true nature of the anomaly, a localized void of fundamental energy, a killer silence tied to absolute cold, remained buried in classified reports. The fate of Thorne, Chen, and Miller was recorded as lost due to unforeseen environmental event. Their bravery in the face of an incomprehensible phenomenon acknowledged only in hushed tones among the few aware of the truth. Anya, Ben, and Mac returned to their respective roles marked by their experience. The vast, empty spaces of Alaska felt different to them now, holding not just natural beauty and wilderness, but the chilling certainty that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only contained. The silent radio tower on the remote plateau became a permanent fixture on classified maps, a stark warning of the forces that could lie hidden beneath the surface of the world, waiting in the deep cold, in the absolute silence. The mystery of why it went silent was solved, but the mystery of what caused the silence, and whether it would remain contained, lingered like the pervasive cold from the plateau. The outpost stood, receiving no signals, transmitting nothing, an enduring symbol of a secret that had consumed its guardians. The long-term monitoring of the Outpost 733 exclusion zone yielded unsettling data. The anomaly wasn't static, nor did it dissipate. The low-frequency emissions fluctuated, but the core zone of extreme cold and energetic silence remained fixed on the plateau, centered roughly on the location of the geological feature identified by the initial team. More concerningly, Thorne's fear of it spreading seemed prescient. The remote sensors detected subtle, gradual expansion of the silence field during periods of peak emission activity. The boundary wasn't sharp. It was more like a gradient where the expected background energy slowly diminished, leading to the absolute silence at the core. This expansion was measured in feet per year, not miles, but it was undeniable. The anomaly was slowly, incrementally growing. The resonance nullifier prototype, RN1, yielded some secrets under intense analysis. Mac's team determined it was indeed designed to emit a specific frequency, but its power output was minimal, and its design seemed based on theoretical principles that were either incomplete or fundamentally flawed. It was a first-generation prototype, far from a functional countermeasure. The data encryption from the hard drive was eventually broken, revealing the full scope of Thorne's data logs and scientific observations. These logs confirmed the correlations he noted in his journal, providing highly technical readings of the energy signatures, temperature drops, and silence phenomenon. There were also theoretical models and hypotheses he and his crew had developed, trying to understand the anomaly. Their best guess, based on the data, involved a unique interplay between deep Earth geological processes, specific mineral compositions in the plateau rock, and complex atmospheric or even ionospheric feedback loops amplified by the extreme Arctic environment. It wasn't easily explained by any single known scientific discipline. It seemed to be a confluence of rare factors creating a localized, persistent violation of thermodynamic principles, a point where energy was consumed rather than emitted or transferred in the usual ways. The team's final, desperate logs showed them attempting increasingly risky diagnostics and even considering physically interfering with the suspected source point, a plan Thorne ultimately abandoned as the anomaly escalated. There were also fragmented communication logs detailing their attempts to report the anomaly's escalation to their superiors before the final communications failure. Attempts that were met with skepticism or bureaucratic delays until it was too late. This added a layer of tragic irony to the events. The Outpost crew had recognized the danger and tried to warn the outside world, but were silenced before they could be understood or rescued. The official classification of the event remained strict. Knowledge of Project Nightingale and the true nature of the anomaly was limited to a select group of scientists, military personnel, and government officials. The plateau was monitored by satellites and long-range sensors, a red zone on secret maps. The silent radio tower stood as a visible marker of the hidden danger, its lack of transmission a constant, unnerving confirmation of the anomaly's power. Expeditions to the area were restricted to highly controlled, heavily equipped teams for deploying or maintaining remote sensors, never staying long and always maintaining a respectful distance from the core silence zone. The potential for the anomaly to accelerate its expansion or to trigger unforeseen global effects remained a subject of urgent, secret research and contingency planning. The mystery of the silent radio tower in Alaska had started with a signal loss, led to the discovery of a vanished crew, uncovered a secret research project, and ultimately revealed a terrifying natural phenomenon, a localized, spreading void of energy, a pocket of absolute cold and silence that defied understanding and threatened, however slowly, to consume its surroundings. The silence wasn't empty. It was a presence, a chilling reminder that some parts of the world, especially the most remote and extreme, held secrets that could redefine our understanding of reality, and that sometimes the most profound mysteries were the ones that left no trace, only an unnerving, persistent silence.